I want to walk through the urgent and terrible news, what's happening in Georgia, North Carolina, and parts of Virginia, Hurricane Helene, and it's less of the hurricane and more of the flooding that ensued because of it.
Exactly. So Hurricane Helene, I think it made landfall as a Category 4 storm, so very powerful. But in contrast to a lot of hurricanes, it wasn't so much the wind damage, that it blew everything over. What happened is it went deep into the interior, more so than a lot of hurricanes do. So it got way up into the mountainous areas of North Carolina, northern Georgia, even eastern Tennessee, dumped a ton of rain. And obviously with these mountainous areas, what you get is all the water rushes down into, pretty narrow areas and causes massive flooding. There's been some viral photographs where you can see entire highways they look like it's a river suddenly. And obviously it's done tons of damage. I think over 100 people dead confirmed, which is, I think, the most we've had from a hurricane in quite a few years.
Yeah, and it's a flooding situation, primarily hitting Georgia, western North Carolina, and southwestern Virginia. Right now, Donald Trump is on his way to Valdosta, Georgia, to offer relief and aid. This is a growing and developing situation, and it is important to not politicize moments like this. However, if Kamala Harris were to become president, understand she is a DEI believer. She's a zealot in race-based type redistribution and aid. And I want to play this piece of tape here, which is from Kamala Harris talking about situations like this, saying that, well, black communities are actually impacted by natural disasters more than white communities, which is totally not correct. There's nothing to support this, or there's no basis for this. Let's play cut 22.
It is our lowest income communities and our communities of color that are most impacted by these extreme conditions and impacted by issues that are not of their own making. And so absolutely. And so we have to address this in a way that is about giving resources based on equity, understanding that we fight for equality, but we also need to fight for equity, understanding not everyone starts out at the same place. And if we want people to be in an equal place, sometimes we have to take into account those disparities and do that work.
Much like COVID, the weather does not care about your skin color. Now, understand, this is an older clip, but this is a picture and a window into her sinister ideology. So Blake, do we have a president right now? And secondly, this is creepy and scary stuff. Kamala Harris's ideology is one that we're going to administer aid based on irrelevant characteristics.
Exactly. So there was a viral clip over the weekend, I'm sure we have it, where Joe Biden is on the tarmac, and someone asks him, do you have anything to say about strikes in Lebanon or in Yemen? So there have been airstrikes there, as there have been in a lot of the Middle East recently. And maybe he misheard it, but he apparently thought they were asking about, the port strike that might be happening on the coast.
Which is a big thing coming, by the way.
They're like, strikes in Yemen. He's like, I've talked to both sides of these strikes. I believe in, organized labor negotiations. We're going to get it done. And okay, yeah, maybe he misheard it, but you should have a president who's aware of what's going on.
Well, and this really is the evolution of ruling by committee.
Yes.
Meaning that there's like 10 or 12 people effectively running our government. It's like Jake Sullivan, Ron Klain. It is the deterioration of the idea of a singular executive.
Yeah, and so you don't have the elected president in charge, and even then, it's really not even necessarily his cabinet secretaries running things. It's chief of staff, it's aides, it's people almost no one can name unless they're, reading a Politico newsletter every single day. And then beneath that, you have Kamala, who, one, we know is not a great executive, because if she was, they would literally let her do something, and they didn't. Correct. They were never letting her do anything. And as you see, her ideology is to give speeches on how, well, when we're responding to a hurricane, which I checked, I think this is the deadliest one in the U.S. since Katrina.
Yeah, and growing, by the way.
Yeah, and she believes that the aid that you offer should be doled out, as you say, based on characteristics like skin color. rather than destruction.
Yes, and I just want to read this. Again, it's tempting to say the federal government's doing nothing. I mean, they're doing something. They did issue some warnings. However, this is definitely being underplayed by the media. That is 100% fair. This is not, they're not calling this a crisis. Well, they sort of are. It's not the level of crisis, for example, of George Floyd. Is it fair to say that there was more media attention?
Slightly more, I'd say.
And which one has caused more human, well, the reaction to George Floyd caused a lot of human suffering, but the actual incident itself. So let me just read this. This is from a friend in North Carolina. The stuff in Western North Carolina is getting really, really bad. As more people get back to service, we're hearing all kinds of stories. Bodies in ditches, bodies floating down rivers, people having babies in homes with no power. 90% of some counties without power. Feds are doing nothing. This is their claim on the ground. Governor is doing, quote, all caps, nothing. We need to do everything we can. Understand 90% of the impacted voters here are Republican voters. Makes you wonder if they're being forgotten for a reason. I am donating XYZ dollars, and there's a suggestion to try to do here is 100 dead as of today. Literally just heard from a buddy who saw bodies in a ditch. It's going to be huge. Now, this also begs a question, though, Blake. We've spent $250 billion on this proxy war in Ukraine. We obviously disagree with that, but it seems like the urgency in D.C. is abstractions abroad and foreign conflicts. We have an urgent situation here on the homeland.
Maybe we could come up with some explanation that this hurricane was like sent by Putin, and then they would actually care a bit more.
I saw
mullahs in Iran.
I saw one tweet of someone saying that the mayor of Asheville needs to go wear a jumpsuit with a black T-shirt, and he's going to get $200 billion.
Maybe shave like 5 inches off his height too,
and just kind of be like half shaved. The situation here also impacts, and I hate to get to the politics of this though, Blake, this is within the 2 states that might determine the entire presidential election.
Very true. And
so tell us about that.
It matters in 2 ways, which is one, yes, as you say, Georgia, we've known as a swing state all along. North Carolina has become a swing state. And
largely because of Mark Robinson.
Yes, and it's polling closer actually now than Arizona and Georgia have been. I think possibly because we just weren't as focused on it initially. And now you have this hurricane. So on the one hand, you have, if there's the perception that, you know, Kamala is off fundraising in San Francisco and that Biden is not really present in any way, that could damage their play in that state. But on the other hand, it has to be said, there's a huge amount of destruction in these counties, which are, as your friend said, very Republican counties. And, you know, if your home's been destroyed, if there's no power, if everything's a mess, I suspect you're going to see lower voter turnout in those places. And, you know, it's even going to seem a little crass to do electioneering when there's so much crisis around. But you're going to have to overcome that and say, you know, guys, if you want your place to not be forgotten, you do have to make sure that you don't forget to vote.
Well, yeah, and so we need to send aid to North Carolina and Georgia right now. I'm searching for the best website to do that. So I'm going to ask you guys in the audience, if there's a local nonprofit where it doesn't go to some grift or some scam, email us some recommendations, freedom@charliekirk.com. We want to make sure we promote that here on air. Secondly, though, Blake, there is and we'll get into this a little bit in the next segment, there's a chaotic early voting thing here. They estimate over 35,000 early ballots disappeared. And so because of the flood, I mean, everything goes away. So ballots have to be reissued, you know, early voting locations. Now, there is a precedent for this. Remember Hurricane Sandy between the 2012 election, but that's before early voting was a really big thing. So we got to kind of figure this out because thankfully it's early enough so that we can make this changes here. But this is catastrophic. Over 100 people dead, and I don't want to say it took us by surprise, but it certainly didn't have the buildup of a usual hurricane, right?
It always depends. Sometimes you get these big sweeps through the Caribbean, flooding. And then, yeah, as it was the biggest impact was pretty deep in the interior, which is not super common.